Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. Please God have this as a regular, a staple Wednesday evening at 7:30. I'll always send out reminders, but please God, it should be standard thing Wednesday night at 7:30. Gary, you've got your hand up. No, sorry, that was my mouse. Apologies. Okay, so just to first of all give a brief synopsis of this parsha, and then to hopefully give some insights into some of the episodes that you read about in this week's parsha. So our parsha, which is Pinchas, takes off where the previous one of Balak ends. So we know Balak tries his best to get Bilam to curse the Jews. Nothing succeeds. But what unfortunately does bring a downfall of the Jewish people are the Midianite women who entice the Jewish people to sin, sexual immorality, idolatry with a particular idol named Baal Peor. And last week's Parsha ended where there were two individuals. Two individuals were exposing themselves doing indecent things in front of the whole community. Zimri was a prince of Shimon, and there was Cosby, a Midianite princess. And what happens is everyone's watching this happen. One individual, Pinchas, gets up and he literally spears the two of them. He puts a spear through both of them, and the plague that had been brought about stops. And this parsha then begins with the rewards that we're told that Pinchas gets as a result of his zealotry. Number one is he's given the covenant of peace, and he's also given the covenant of the priesthood. As a result of what Midian had done to the Jewish people, and in particular the woman, Hashem tells Moshe that there's always going to be this status of enmity between the Jewish people, Bnei Israel, and the tribe of Midian. We then go on, and bear in mind, this is really on the precipice of entering the land of Israel. Hashem commands Moshe and Elazar. Remember, that's the son of Aaron. Aaron had previously passed away. So they are commanded to conduct a census to count the Jewish people, all Israelites over the age of 20 years old. And we get the results of the census in the Parsha. We also, the reason why the census is taken is that there's going to be a division of the land of Israel. It's already divided before the Jewish people go into the land of Israel. We also see that the census for the Levites is done separately. Then we have the episode of the four daughters of Tzlafchad. They approach Moshe and they say, "Our father," that being Tzlafchad, passed away, and he didn't have any sons. So now it's unfair that we're not going to have any portion in the land because there were no sons. What about us, the daughters? Moshe thinks this is a good shaila, and he goes straight to God and he poses a question to God. And God tells Moshe that in fact they've spoken correctly. And in all instances, in fact, here we have the setting of this law in Jewish law, that where there are no sons to inherit, the daughters take the place of the sons. We have again in this week's Parsha, Hashem telling Moshe of his impending death, that he wouldn't lead the Jewish people into the promised land. Moshe, hearing that, wants to make sure that there's an adequate successor in place to lead the Jewish people. He uses beautiful imagery like, you can't have a flock of sheep without a shepherd. I need to make sure that there's a shepherd in place. Hashem tells him that the successor is going to be Yoshua. We find something tremendous about Moshe. Moshe is told by God to place his hand on Joshua. In fact, he places his hands, plural. What we learn from that nuance is Moshe gives absolutely to the task, even though he's disappointed that he's not going to go into the land of Israel. He's no longer going to be the leader. Nevertheless, he gives everything over. He wants the absolute best, the best blessings to go over to Joshua. Both his hands are placed, and he goes above and beyond the actual instruction that God gave him to place the one hand on Joshua. And immediately thereafter, we have, I think it's from Chamishi onwards, the fifth aliyah, We have all the various sacrifices. Hashem instructs Moshe, got the sacrifices relating to the daily Tamid offering, the Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and the Musaf festival Karbanot as well, sacrifices. So that is the synopsis of really what takes place in this week's Parsha. I'm going to try to get through 3 or 4 concepts, fascinating concepts from this week's Parsha. The first one is to try to understand what is the Torah perspective towards zealotry. In other words, someone getting up and extra judiciously, I think that's the word, going and killing someone. There's no trial, there's no Beis Din involved, but he goes and executes someone summarily. Okay, so what's Judaism's position regarding a zealot, regarding zealotry? So we see on the one hand that the Gemara, the Talmud, includes the circumstances that were faced by Pinchas as part of the Jewish law, which permits zealous acts. And that means to summarily execute people while they're involved, presently committing the act. So it's listed as a permissible thing to do on the one hand. But on the other hand, we find that there's this interesting term. I'm not familiar with it in any other place in Jewish law, but it's known as halacha ve'ein morin. Zealotry is called a halacha ve'ein morin, which means it's a law, so it's there, but we don't teach it. In other words, it's something that's not encouraged. What we know is that had Pinchas paused and had Pinchas gone and asked halachic question at the time, and he asked Moshe, what should I do? The halachic answer that would have been given to him is don't act. Okay, so it's something that's certainly not encouraged. In fact, the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, tells us that the sages of the time, at that moment after Pinchas had acted, they wanted to excommunicate Pinchas straight away. And it was only through the divine intervention, Hashem communicating the rewards of the priesthood of peace to Pinchas, that the sages obviously didn't excommunicate him. They knew it was something that Hashem approved of, and in fact gave spiritual gifts to Pinchas. But what it tries to balance, or what's needed to balance in this whole concept of zealotry is, on the one hand, you have to have Jewish law. You have to have a sense of a stable, consistent Jewish law that doesn't bend, that is predictable, and you know where you stand. It's black and white. So proper halacha. On the other hand, if you don't have measures in place which allow for urgent interventions in extreme or emergency situations, well, how long is your halacha? How long are the people going to survive? You think about all the trials and tribulations through Jewish history. You have to have some mechanism in place that can, in the moment, allow for an act like Pinchas, taking the law into his own hands. So again, I said this concept of halacha ve'ein morin. So it's a law, but we don't teach it. So I said, had Pinchas sought halachic approval, it wouldn't have been given to him. It was just that he did it in the heat of the moment. Some commentators point out that why halacha is so hesitant with giving permission, or hesitant about the whole concept of zealotry, is because to be a zealot is a mere allowance in Torah law. Okay, it's not something that's commanded. So in other words, Pinchas wasn't commanded at that time to go and act. It was something that was made permissible to him. It was an allowance, but it's not an obligation. And because Pinchas felt so much emotion, not for his own, but for God in that moment, he acted in that moment. But had he sought approval or halachic approval, he wouldn't have been given that. The other reason for maybe halachic hesitation is you need to question the motives of the zealot himself or herself, in this case himself. An act of zealotry has to be without impure motives or intention. It has to be solely for the sake of God. If Pinchas, for argument's sake, had to have had a faribble with this guy Zimri, and now was a lovely opportunity to kill Zimri, and say it was for God's honor, well, it's not 100% in honor of Hashem, so it's tainted. And obviously, how rare it is to find someone doing something that's purely l'shem shamayim, for heaven's sake, without any ulterior motives. That's perhaps a reason for more hesitancy on the side of halacha to teach these acts of zealotry. And again, it's actually quite logical that if a person was to go seek, so in other words, pause, if Pinchas would have paused and gone to seek halachic authority or approval to kill these two individuals, well, then he's no longer acting in the heat of the moment, right? Zealotry is only in the heat of the moment, in the emotion, for the honor of God. Then and there you go and you strike. That's a zealot. You're not a zealot if you've paused and now you're taking a few moments to gather your thoughts and you're going to ask a question. Well, then it's not. Then it becomes premeditated. It's no longer in the act itself. So those are some of the thinking behind Judaism about zealotry. Um, Another thing there that I came across as well, and I saw it in a book called Kli Chemda. So it says like this, that why again halacha is hesitant to teach about zealotry and let's say to promote zealotry is because the zealot puts himself in a dangerous situation, right? You're going against the flow. You're going against the mob. Here's a mob. They're in a frenzy, sexual frenzy, immorality, idolatry, and you now are going as a sole individual. Yes, you've put a spear through these two people, but you've got a whole mob. They might come and now kill you. So it puts you at great danger. Where the Talmud, where the Gemara speaks about zealotry, it speaks in the plural zealots. In other words, where there'd be a greater permission, if you like, where they two or more act in concert with each other. So it's no longer one person swimming against the current, but he's got other supporters who themselves feel the same and in the heat of the moment do the same thing. Okay, so that's just a little bit about zealotry and the Jewish perspective of zealotry. Just going to put, okay, muted, perfect. Now, the other question is, what about these rewards that come? I said Hashem gives the reward of a covenant of peace and a covenant of eternal priesthood is given to Pinchas and his descendants. Firstly, I'm going to just pose a few questions first and hopefully give the answers, is that giving Pinchas the covenant of peace sounds counterintuitive. I've just mentioned it's an act of zealotry is performed. It's a violent act. He's gone and stabbed two individuals, put a spear through both of them simultaneously, and this individual is getting the covenant, the gift of peace. Doesn't make sense. We also have to know or try to understand, is the gift of priesthood an appropriate gift? The Torah mentions Pinchas ben Elazar. He's the son of Elazar. Ben Aaron HaKohen is the grandson of Aharon. Aaron was known as the Ohev Shalom, Verodev Shalom, the one who loved peace and pursued peace. And now you're going to continue that legacy of priesthood and give it to someone who's now gone and done something violent. Again, it sounds counterintuitive. We also have to try understand, are the two covenants one, or are they separate? Or is it just synonymous, where the Torah says a covenant of peace and a covenant of priesthood, are they one and the same thing? So Rashi, the famous biblical commentator, says he maintains that they are synonymous. There is not a difference between the gift, the covenant of peace, and the covenant of priesthood. By the way, one other question that we need to solve for as well is, what are we talking about Pinchas getting the covenant of priesthood? I've already mentioned that his yichus, his genealogy is mentioned. He's the son of Elazar, the grandson of Aaron the high priest. Surely he's already a priest by virtue of the fact that he's the grandson of Aaron, the son of Elazar, who were both priests themselves. What do you mean you're giving him a gift of priesthood? Isn't he a priest already? Okay, so Rashi first of all says that the two gifts, the two covenants, are pretty much one and the same thing. They're not separate. You've got other commentaries like the Barbanel, who says they are different. And he goes on to say that the covenant of peace that Hashem gives to Pinchas is actually a promise from Hashem that he would personally protect Pinchas's personal safety. Again, think about it. He's now gone and killed the prince of Shimon. Zimri was Nesibes Avle Shimoni. He was the prince of the tribe of Shimon. You think that tribe's not powerful. You think Zimri didn't have friends. Yeah? Friends in high places. What about retribution? Could they now go after Pinchas? So the Brit Shalom, says that Barbanel, was a personal guarantee that Hashem gives that no one is going to exact retribution against you. You're going to be safe. The Sforno, in a slightly similar vein, he also says that it's spiritual protection, but he says like this, and he cites various textual and midrashic sources to say that what is the gift of peace that Hashem was giving to him? It was actually the gift of longevity. Because if we actually looked in the text and we look at the midrashim, Pinchas outlives all of his contemporaries. So he lives much longer than all the others. Okay. The Netziv says something quite interesting as well. He says, what is the covenant of peace? So he says, think about it. Pinchas has now gone and done something extremely violent. We know that one's actions can define one. One's actions can lead to a habit. So Pinchas might have been concerned now that maybe he's going to be a violent person into the future because of this terribly violent act that he's performed. No. Hashem says to him that I'm giving you the covenant of peace, that your whole persona is not going to change. You've done this one violent act, but you're going to remain a peaceful person, and this isn't going to define you into the future. That's what the Netziv says. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says something beautiful as well. And he says that, different people can have different perspective, different understanding of what peace is. But Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch said that the Torah perspective and the definition of peace is quite clear. And I'll read to you the English of what he writes. And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says that true peace of men rests on the peace of all of them with God. In other words, for there to be peace, a person to have peace, there's to be greater peace, harmony between Hashem and all people, between people and Hashem. Now, what happens if someone comes along and through their action are enemies of harmony between divine truth, between Hashem and people? Well, then someone like Pinchas comes along and he defeats the enemy of divine truth. So in effect, his act is the greatest act of peace because he's trying to restore peace. Again, peace is the wonderful relationship between God and his people. And if you're doing things immoral, if you're doing things against what Hashem asks of us to do, well, then you're eliminating peace from the world. By Pinchas going and acting and eliminating these enemies of peace, he's actually doing a peaceful act, and that's the Brit Shalom, the covenant of peace that he's getting. The issue of why is it a gift in the first place to Pinchas? Because we know Pinchas is a grandson of Aaron, so he should just, by virtue of that fact, be a Kohen through the lineage. So Rashi gives an explanation like this. Rashi says that priesthood was only confirmed after it was given to Aaron and his sons. Once Aaron and his sons were appointed as priests, only the children born after that fact would become priests, would become Kohanim. And in this instance, Pinchas was already born before Aaron and his sons were anointed as Kohanim. So he didn't qualify to become a Kohen. It would only take some extraordinary event for him to be appointed a Kohen. And that extraordinary event actually happens, his act of zealotry, and that's the reward he gets for acting like that in the honor of God. He gets the priesthood, which wouldn't ordinarily have come to him because he was already born at the time. That's according to Rashi. The Ramban and the Ibn Ezra say that what the Brit Kuna is referring to, they say no. He was a priest all the time. By virtue of his lineage, he was a priest all the time. But what is this actual covenant that's been given to him? It's the covenant of the high priesthood. So what was being said to him is that you and from your descendants, Pinchas is going to become, the Kohen Gadol is going to become the high priest. Yeah, it's a given, you're a priest already. But the high priesthood is going to come through you and your descendants. Okay, other commentaries say also that Pinchas was concerned. There's a law that a Kohen can't be involved in any acts of murder. So Pinchas thought that he would have to give up his rights as a Kohen. Now Hashem doesn't give it to him for the first time, but just reestablishes or confirms Pinchas, notwithstanding the fact that you've killed two individuals, because you did it for the greater good, you did it for my honor, you are not going to relinquish your status as Kohanim, and God's confirming that continues. I'll just end with this. The Chsav Sofer, he actually is able to weave together both of these covenants, the covenant of peace and the covenant of priesthood. So he says that the priesthood is specifically conveyed to Pinchas after his act of zealotry. He says, as teachers and as role models, the Kohanim have to show their strength in leadership, their unbending nature, that on matters of law and ritual, there's black and white. This is how it is. You can't step out of that. But at the same time, while the Kohen has to make sure that he's implementing and being the right role model for halacha, he can't just be so clinical and so detached from the people. He also has to be the Ohev Shalom, Rodef Shalom, like the Aaron. He has to be the peacemaker. He has to be the one that brings peace between persons. So it's striking the balance of both of that. In other words, there are going to be times where, as a priest, Pinchas will have to be an Aaron, take the position of the soft peacemaker. And there are going to be times when he has to be like the zealot, when he has to take stronger actions. But having those two gifts, those two covenants, give him the balance that he needs. I've got two things I want to try to cover. I'm just trying to think which one I want to do and which one. Okay, let's try to see if we can cover. I want to deal with the concept of the division of land. I mentioned this week's Parsha, the land is divided. Prior for them to go into the land of Israel, the tribes already know what portion they're getting. Now, we seem to find a contradiction in the Gemara, where on the one hand, the phrase says, Lo ele techalek haaretz. The English is to these, in other words, to this generation standing now, the land is going to be divided and given to. Then you also find, on the other hand, the phrase that according to the names of their fathers, the tribes will inherit. In other words, referring to the previous generation that has now died out. Remember, these are the next generation about to enter the land of Israel. So what is it? Is it these people inheriting now? Or is it somehow a connection to the generation past because it says the names of their fathers? So there are three opinions actually given in the Gemara. I'll just mention the one by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So he says like this, that the land is distributed both to those leaving Egypt, in other words, the earlier generation, and each individual amongst the earlier generation leaving Egypt bequeathed a portion to the children. In other words, these are the children now entering the land of Israel. And of course, each individual of the new generation is also bequeathed a portion. So they, in fact, have two portions. Now, even though it's quite a, shall I say, difficult mandate or difficult procedure regarding the inheritance, and why did there have to be even this dispute in the Gemara about how it was done, or on what basis, or with what intention was it done? Um, I think what comes through is that now the people, those inheriting, are going into the land of Israel. They now are getting something that doesn't just tie the people to the land, but in fact, all the aspirations, the generational aspirations, going back to the avot of inheriting a land. Now they have that. They have the aspirations. They have the realization, the actualization of the promise long given by Hashem to Abraham and certainly to these people's ancestors, that the land was going to be given to them, and it's the fulfillment of their parents' dreams. It's wonderful. And maybe it's also saying like this, that Hashem is emphasizing the fact that true success in Judaism, a success for a Jew is determined in intergenerational terms. In other words, what is the next generation able to do? What is the next generation achieving that I wasn't able to achieve? And even though the previous generation aren't present, because already they've died out in the desert, nevertheless, everything they stood for, their accomplishments, their struggles is actually actualized by their children now entering the land of Israel and getting their division of the land which comes to them. So they certainly have to be mentioned in the names, because again, it's an actualization of their dreams. It's realizing the next generation that I'm not just who I am today because, I don't know, it just happens to be that. No, I'm the product of the previous generation, who was the product of their previous generation. In other words, Shalsheret Hadarot, the continuity in the generations, and that's so important. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there. Maybe open up for questions, because I'm scared if I go into the next topic, I'm not going to have enough time to finish. But if anyone does have a question, you feel free to unmute yourself. Because I'll quickly will then say, I will quickly say the other topic I wanted to speak about. Just indulge me another 3 minutes or so. Why is it? And sorry, does anyone have a question?
Me, Gary. It's a very quick one.
Sure.
Is it true? I've heard that Pinchas became Eliyahu Hanavi.
Yes. So the Gilgal, we would talk about reincarnation. So I'm not sure offhand where it is, where the support comes from, but I'm definitely 100% sure that I've read it, that he is reincarnated as Eliyahu Hanavi, as the prophet Elijah, that being Pinchas. The soul of Pinchas reincarnates into future into Elijah the prophet. I'll try to find the exact source, Gary, but it is 100% correct.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Just quickly, I'll say this. We know we've got weird juxtapositions in the Torah, but straight after Moshe anoints, if you like, Yoshua, Hashem tells him that Joshua is going to be the successor. What follows are a few aliyahs, a couple of columns in the Torah dealing with the sacrifices. Why? Why straight after the appointment do you start dealing with the sacrifices? It seems so out of place. So the Ibn Ezra says like this, that after Moshe's death, obviously he's not going to be around to instruct the people once they enter into the land of Israel. And these laws are only going to become mandatory, prescribed once they enter the land of Israel. You've got to understand, Torah is obviously given. Torah has been given and explained a few times over the 40 years at different junctures. So they are performing many mitzvahs before, but there's certain mitzvot that are only going to be incumbent on them once they enter the land of Israel. These sacrifices, being some of them. And Moshe is not going to be there, so he has to now instruct them in his absence. Um, the other thing is like this. This is what the Ralbag says. He says, after Moshe's passing, we need to understand who Moshe was. Moshe was, he says, Lord, come Navi od ke Moshe. No other prophet is going to live, is going to be as great as Moshe, and none has ever been so. So the prophecy, the whole communication with God is going to be diluted from this moment onwards. Whatever Joshua and other leaders are going to get through a weaker form of nevuah, of prophecy, communication from Hashem, is going to be aided by what's called the Urim and the Tumim, Urim v'Tumim, which is a spiritual mechanism that they would ask questions of God. The Urim and Tumim were situated in the Kohen Gadol's breastplate. And it said that the Urim and Urim v'Tumim were only going to be effective if the rituals of the Kohanim were preserved. Now, what is the main ritual of the Kohanim? It's bringing the sacrifices, whether it's the Tamid, the perpetual sacrifice, the daily sacrifice. If it was going to be the festival sacrifices, the Musaf, if that's not being done, then the Urim and Tumim, this magic, spiritual magic, I don't want to use the word magic, but this divine messaging that takes place between a leader of the Jewish people and God is not going to be strong because it's dependent upon the Kohanim doing their rituals. And of course, if there are no sacrifices and the people aren't commanded about the sacrifices, well, then future leadership is not going to be as effective. And that's why the Ralbag explains, is it given over now? Because it's precisely at this time where you're going into a different form of leadership, where it's not going to be as direct from God as it was before. Again, Moshe speaks panim el panim, we're told, literally face to face with God. It's never going to be like that with any of the other leaders or prophets to come. It's going to need the aid of the special divine mechanism, the Urim v'Tumim, which itself can only be 100% effective if the Kohanim are abiding by their ritual. What is their ritual? It is the bringing of the sacrifices. There can be no sacrifice if the people aren't instructed regarding the sacrifices, and that's why we have the sacrifices at this time. End with that. Just wish everyone a good Shabbos. I just also want to say, hot off the press, I'm going to be giving, please God, a new Shiur. It's part of a program I want to put in place for, call it retirees or people who maybe aren't working a full day and want to be involved in shul activities. So maybe there'll be guest speakers, there'll be movies during the day. Well, one of the things I want to do weekly is give a Shiur. So I know it may not fit in with everyone's timetable, but those that can make it in the space, the Victory Park Shul, on a Tuesday at 11 o'clock in the morning, I'll be giving about a 45-minute shiur on Mesilat Yesharim, which is really the way I've advertised it, or will be advertising it, is the soul of Jewish living. It's a beautiful, beautiful book written by the Ramchal, and please God, we'll go through that over a period of however long it takes us. And for those who can't make it, I'll try also put out a recording afterwards similar to this one. So there'll always be the Wednesday evening at 7:30 live on Zoom, and there'll be the face-to-face recorded one on a Tuesday morning in the space, please God, at 11 o'clock. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Have a good night.
Good.